Today we're going to pull our premium planner data using Power Query. So this will work with Excel or Power BI. I'm going to show you how to get there in Excel and then do most of the process in Power BI just because I feel like it handles the data modeling a lot better. This will work to pull all of your planner data for your entire organization or just your planner data or any combination of what you need. So since there's several versions of Planner at this point in time that all live in different places and all function slightly differently, I want to make sure that we are on the same page as far as which version of Planner we're talking about. Standard Planner is the one that is called Planner in the app launcher currently. So that is the one that's included with most license bundles. The one that we're going to be talking about today is the one where the data lives in Dataverse. And I'm going to show you which one I mean just to make sure that we're on the same page. So the UI for the planner we're going to be dealing with today looks like this. There's a board view, there's a grid view, there's a timeline. So this is the data that we're going to be pulling. The cool thing about Premium Planner as a data source, this particular one, is that all of the data lives in Dataverse. You can pull the tasks table directly and it will pull all of the tasks from all of the plans that you have access to. There's also more than several dimension tables that we're going to be looking at that we can use to create a more holistic model of our task data. So let me show you where the connection point is in Excel, and then we're going to jump over to Power BI. So in Excel, you're going to want to go to the Data tab in the ribbon, and then go to Get Data from Power Platform and choose From Dataverse. It'll have you log in with your Dataverse credentials. Those are your Microsoft 365 credentials, same ones you use for your email and all that. For what we're doing in the Power Query part of this tutorial is going to be exactly the same in Excel as it is in Power BI. So I'm going to jump over to Power BI. The data modeling functionality, I will say, in Excel is a little bit weak. So if you have Power BI, I recommend you use that. The desktop version of Power BI is free. It's just sharing access to reports and dashboards. So that is a license trigger. Over to Power BI. In Power BI, we're going to go to Get Data in the toolbar and then choose Dataverse from the menu here. It's notable that there's two Dataverse connectors. If you're going through the different menus, use the one that looks newer. It's got the green logo. So depending on your setup, you may see a whole bunch of these little database looking icons in your Dataverse connector. Those are all of your Power Platform Dataverse environments. So I only have one because I only have one environment in this tenant. If you're using Dynamics or Power Platform really heavily, you might have a whole bunch here. What you want to look for is the one that's labeled default. So right now, all of the planner data all goes into the default environment. So we're going to be able to find it there. Scroll down the list until you get to the project related tables. So those are the MSDYN_project. The first one we want is this project table. So that's going to have your project names and IDs and the project manager associated with those. The baseline tables, those are a Planner Plan 3 feature. So if you're using Planner Plan 1, you don't need those. If you're using the baselines, feel free to take them. The baselines are essentially like a snapshot of the start and end dates at a particular point in time. Currently, you can only have one baseline per project, and it does get captured for each of the tasks individually in this project baseline task data table. So take those if you want them. The bucket you don't actually need. So this project bucket table we're going to skip because we have the bucket name in the task table, and that's really all the information about the bucket that we can do anything with. So we don't need that one. The checklist, get that if you want the checklist. These aren't super useful at a high level for reporting, in my opinion. And then project label. So project label are the little colored flags that you can put on tasks. So the really nice thing about Premium Planner, if you're used to working with the standard planner, is that in Premium Planner, if you assign a custom name to those labels, that gets populated in this table. So you don't have to do anything super janky to import that like you do for Standard Planner when you're working with the data. So some of these tables look useful, but are actually empty. I'm not sure if they are for future features or if they're for deprecated things from, say, the Microsoft Accelerator app thing from years back, but you can feel free to click through those and see if there's anything that you want in them. I'm going to skip Project Sprint because the sprint name is in the task table, so we don't really need that. Project Task is the big one. And I know a lot of people are going to see this project status report and be like, ooh, I want to do status reports with this. I don't think this is currently used for anything as far as I can tell. You can build custom status reporting stuff onto Planner, but I don't think that it's currently built in. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong on that, somebody please correct me. The task attachments, those are going to be the files that are attached to an item. So it just has the hyperlink and the task ID. So if you wanted to use that, you could. I don't see a huge value in that for reporting. This task conversation looks interesting, but it just has a bunch of IDs in it. It doesn't actually have the real conversation. I think the conversations for these are stored in Teams somewhere. So you'd have to pull in the Teams data somehow. The project task to label tells you which labels are applied to which tasks. So that's important. The project team is going to be your team members. So who's a member of your team? If you're wanting to use row level security with this to filter what people see based on what team they're a member of, you would use this table. We also need resource assignment. So resource assignment is going to be who's assigned to which tasks, your assignees. And then if you are using roadmaps, which is a plan 3 and up feature, you can import that here. So the roadmap is going to be the project level roadmap, and then the item link is going to be the items that are in the roadmap. If you're not familiar, it's basically a Gantt chart that shows specific tasks and groups of tasks together across projects in the Planner web app. You could potentially use this for other things, like if you're trying to group up tasks across plans. You don't have to use it like a roadmap per se. That's just what they call it. And I'm going to look for one more way down at the bottom. That is system user. So system user is going to have user information. So the Dataverse tables will almost always be, if they're showing people data, they'll show you an ID for the user, but not any other information associated with that user. So if you want to pull in, say, their email address to use for row level security, or if you want to be able to group things by business unit or department, if you're using those in Dataverse, you want to pull in the system user table. And if you're looking at this and you're like, why is there only one row in the table in the preview? It's because these Dataverse tables have like 600 columns on them. And so it really truncates what it shows you. You're going to go to the transform data button down here and then choose the connection type. So you will almost always want to use import in Power BI. People are tempted to use direct query because they're like, oh, it's instant. That's going to be better, right? But it's not. It's really slow. Dataverse is slow on its own. So if you combine direct query and Dataverse, it's just going to be really slow. You can do composite models where you pull in and import mode some of the summarized stuff and then direct query the details, and that works okay, but don't use only direct query, all right? So I'm going to click OK. And then we need to clean up these tables because by default, it's going to make a bit of a mess for us. So here's what we have to start. I'm actually going to do one more thing before I do anything here, and that is going back to Power BI and going into the options and settings in the file menu, and then go to options, and we are going to turn off the auto relationships feature. You can do it for just the current file or for all files. I'm going to go for data load current file, and I'm going to turn off this import relationships from data sources on first load, and this auto detect new relationships. So basically, if you leave these on, Power BI tries to automatically create your table relationships, and it makes a really big mess, and you have to go in and delete all the relationships. So it's easier just to turn it off to start with versus trying to fix that later. Okay, back to Power Query. We have all our tables here. If you are wanting to be organized, you probably want to rename these tables to make sense. So to do that, you just double click on these tables to rename them. I'm just going to cut the video to the part where I have them all renamed so that you don't have to watch me do this. All right, so I've renamed all of my tables. The next thing we need to do is to remove all of the columns that we're not going to use because Dataverse has an excessive number of columns, and if you don't remove the extra ones, it's going to make your refresh time super slow and it's going to be really painful to work with. I'm going to go through each of these tables one by one and show you the columns that I think are useful, and then we're going to add some custom columns onto this too because some of the data needs a little bit of handling to make it user-friendly. So for project, you always want to keep the ID column for the table that you're working with. So we're going to keep the project ID. If you want the created on date, that's actually kind of useful because then you can know which projects are like 10 years old when time goes by. Modified on is probably also good to know, so you know if the project is completely stale. Created by name is a good one, so you know who made it. The owner ID here is going to be related to the group because the group owns the plan, so you can pull that in if you want to. So what I'm doing is I'm holding down Control on my keyboard and selecting the columns that I want, and then I'm going to do a right click and remove other columns. So the one that we really need is this subject field. So subject is the plan name, so also known as the project name. And another handy trick for this is when you go to remove other columns, you can actually go to the little settings icon on this right hand side over by applied steps. If you click on that, you can go and adjust the columns. So you can go and pull in things that you missed later. So there's a few in here that I want to add. So there's a project manager. You can search in here too. So project manager name. And you can pull their ID if you want to also. That's going to be this one here. There's also, if you want to use it, a start and end date for the project. So that's finish and can't find start. I'll just search for it. Start. There's also a bunch of effort columns. So the effort, this is basically like pre-summarized information from your tasks. So it tells you basically how many hours are logged to the project. And by hours, I don't mean like how long do things take. I mean like literally it converts the days, the number of days between the start and the end date into hours. I think it uses 8 hours per day. So you can pull these in if you want to, but you can also just summarize them from tasks and that works too. So click OK on that. And then something else you might want to do in this table while you're here is to add a column for the link to the project in Planner. So this will make it so that if you're using these projects in tables in Power BI, people can click on the links using the conditional formatting to go to the project in Planner. So to get that, all you do is you go visit one of your plans. So if I open this one up, I need to refresh. This hyperlink up here is going to follow a very specific format. So if I just copy this part up through the project ID equals and then make a custom column with that. So under this add a column menu here, go to custom column. We're going to call this project URL. So put in double quotes and then paste in that path. And then we're going to double click on this project ID field. So that's going to add in the project ID to that link and click OK. So if we try one of these out to make sure it works, we can just copy and paste this in our browser and that worked. So that's good. Go back here. So I'm going to reorder these kind of in order of importance so that we can hit the things that are important first. So I'm going to put the tasks way up here towards the top and we're going to tackle that next because that's going to be the one that pretty much everybody needs. So for tasks, we're going to need a lot of stuff. So we're going to select the task ID because we need that. If you want the created date, take that. And I want to point out here that all of these tables are going to be permission trimmed for the user that is pulling the data initially. So as a person who's making a Power BI file, you are the data set owner by default. So when it refreshes, it's going to run using your permissions. So whatever you have access to, it's going to pull. So what a lot of people do with this is they use a service account and then they say, for instance, add the service account on the plans that they want to pull. But if you are an end user, say a project manager, and you're looking at this tasks table, it's only going to have the tasks for the projects that you're a member of. I just want to point that out to be super clear because Dataverse knows who you are. So subject is your task name. You want that, obviously. So if you pull description, make sure to pull the plain text so you don't have to weed out the HTML. Duration, effort, effort completed, effort remaining are probably all things that you want. The finish date you want, and we're going to change this from date time to date in a minute. These ones that have both a true false column and a yes no column, you can just choose one or the other. I kind of like the text version of yes no because it's a little bit more user friendly for people that are reading it as a filter. This is manual is basically when you set the dates on a task, you can either have auto set dates based off of the predecessors of that task, so what dependencies it has, etc., or you can manually set the dates. So that gives you a true false if you need that, whether or not it's a milestone. The outline level is basically what level it's at in the hierarchy. Top level tasks are going to be level 1. The ones underneath that are going to be level 2 and so on and so forth. And it tells you the parent task ID here if you need that for anything. This task data is completely flattened. So getting it to show in tables in Power BI in a hierarchy is going to be a total pain. So I don't really recommend that you do that. I recommend using this more for counting number of tasks and counting effort, summing up effort over projects. Progress is actually your percentage complete. So pull that if you want to. We're going to be calculating our own percentage complete for any level of these things. So the project, the bucket, the whatever. But the progress can be useful as a filter. So if you're trying to figure out what's complete or what's not, you can use that column. So project, that's the project ID. We want that. The bucket ID we don't really need because we're not trying to relate bucket to anything. We're just going to get the bucket name from further down the line here. So scheduled end and scheduled start. I kind of alluded to the difference between start and scheduled start, etc. earlier. Scheduled start is going to be the auto set dates for the tasks. Start date is if you are manually setting things, it's going to use that. So you notice that this one has some nulls in it. That's what this little bit of an empty bar here means. So basically those are items that I didn't set a start date for, but the scheduled start date is filled in for all of those because it's going based off of the tasks that came before it. So just choose which one you want to use there. So project name is here, but we have our own project dimension that we're using, so we don't necessarily need that. The bucket name we want. Parent task name you can take if you want to, but I am not going to use that. The priority is not in here as text. We have to do that ourselves, but I'll show you that in a minute. And then this project task to goal, if you're using the goals, keep holding down control and select this one too. And then we're going to do a right click, remove other columns, and we're left with just the ones we want to use. So this project task to goal, currently in Planner, you can only have a task associated with one goal at a time. So we can actually just expand this here to get the goal name. So click the little double arrow icon and you can search on goal. So we want the goal ID and the goal name. I'm going to uncheck this prefix box and click OK. So I'll show you what I mean when I say you can only have one goal per task right now. So when you're in Planner, I have two goals here on one plan. If I go to add another task to this plan, this one here has already been added to this goal down here, and I can't select it again for this goal up here. So what that means is you only have one goal per task in its current state, so you can expand it in tasks without causing row duplication. This might change in the future, but for right now, we can do that and make it easy on ourselves. All right, back to tasks. So unlike the basic planner, there's not a task status field. So if we want to have one, we need to add one. So I'm going to go to conditional column up here. I'm going to call this task status. You can use either the effort columns or the progress column to set the status. So the progress is going to be basically the percentage complete. So if the progress is equal to 1, which is 100%, then complete. Do the same thing again. Progress is equal to 0, then not started. And then we can do one more for progress greater than 0, then in progress. So what this does is it goes through these in order. So it's going to check and see if it's complete first. And then if it's not complete, it's going to check and see if it's not started. And if it's not matching that one, then it's going to check and see if it's in progress. And then for else, we can just say null. So just to check yourself, go and look in the menu here and make sure that you have some values for everything you should have values for. So I have a whole bunch of not started tasks. That's why mine all say not started. But basically, if we scroll down and find one that actually has progress, so like this one is 57%, that should be in progress, and it is. So that's right. I like to rename these custom column steps so that I can see what they're about because we're going to have more than one, and it's easier to figure out what's going on when we go back and look at it later if it has a name. So I like to do custom column task status. So I just right clicked on this and went to the properties menu. If you're going to be visualizing things based on the task status, you want a column to use for the sort because what happens is it usually sorts these alphabetically. Usually people want to show like not started, in progress, then complete. So what you can do here is do another conditional column based off of those values to set a custom sort. And then later on when we're in the modeling view, we can tell it to sort the task status by the number column. So if the task status is not started, then 1. The task status is in progress. Just make sure you spell these right when you're typing them. Then 2. And if the task status is complete, then 3, else, I don't know, 4, and rename that. All right, so the other biggie is going to be the priority. So the priority is a number value in the Dataverse table. Usually people want to see the priority value as text. We're going to add a column for that text label. So I'm going to add another conditional column, call it priority text, and we're going to use this MSDYN priority field. If it equals 1, then urgent. So the way I figured these out was I went and made a task of each priority to figure out which one was mapping to which numbers. These are the actual values. So if it is equal to 3, then it's important. 5 is medium and 9 is low. We can do else null here too. So we're not done yet. We have more custom columns to make. I'm adding chapters for all of the major things in this video. So if you need to bookmark it and come back to it later, you can. Okay, so next we're going to check and see if a task is overdue. So I'm going to go ahead and change all of our date fields from date time to date, because that makes the date comparison a lot easier, and because we want these to display as dates, not date times in our reporting, right? So you can hold down Control and select multiple. So just select all of the date time fields. Well, and maybe this one too, why not? Did I get them all? One more. And then go to this data type and change it to dates. And I'm actually going to drag this step up the list of applied steps. So I'm going to drag it from where it is here up above this custom column step here. So Dataverse is a source that supports query folding. What this means is if you take all of your steps that work with query folding, which is your filters, your remove columns, your type changes, that kind of thing, and you put those at the top of your applied steps, it's going to make your query a lot faster when it runs, because it's going to translate to SQL when it goes and gets your data. If you want to check to see if your query folding is working or not, if you right click on these steps and then go to this view native query, if that's not grayed out, then it's folding. So if I click on that, you can see the SQL that it's using. It's pulling less data this way because this is folding to the source. Okay, back to our columns. So a little bit sidetracked. We're going to go back down to the bottom step and add another custom column. This one was going to be our whether or not it's overdue. So overdue question mark. This is going to be an if statement. So everything in Power Query is case sensitive. So be very careful. Don't get creative with your case here. We want to check and see if the task is complete. So we're going to use the progress column. So this one here, if the progress is less than 1, so 1 is 100%, and the finish date, so that's this finish date here. You could use the scheduled end date for this too, depending. So date time dot date parentheses date time local now. So that's, oops, it just auto completed in a weird way. Okay, so date time local now parentheses, some more parentheses, some more parentheses. So what this is doing is it's getting the date time right now and then converting it to date. And then we're going to do then yes, else no. All right, one more thing we might want to do in this task table is to make a hyperlink to the task so that somebody can click a task in Power BI and be taken to the task in Planner to, say, edit it. So we can use the exact same technique that we used before for this. So that was with our link to our plan. If I go back to the actual plan itself and open up one of these tasks with the info icon, if you click on this little ellipses menu for the task, there's an option to copy link to task. So if you copy that and then paste it somewhere, so you can see that this has the same kind of format where it has project ID equals, and then it also has and task ID equals this. We don't need this and time equals part, but I'm going to copy this first part again, just like we did before, and then head back here and add a custom column. We're going to call this task URL. Now it's going to be double quotes. And then we need an and sign and the project ID. That was MSDYN project, this one here. And then another and then double quotes. And then the way the URL parameters work is you do and inside the double quotes, task ID equals, and then do an and sign, and then put in the task ID, which was this one up here, project task ID. So there's a fun option for task mode. You can set this to 0 or 1. Let me show you what it does. So if I go up here and look at this URL, this one has an and task mode equals 1 on it. If I change this 1 to a 0 and hit enter, you notice it opens in like more of a little pop up in the center of the screen, and I kind of like that better. So I'm just going to tack on this and task mode equals 0 to the end of that URL just for funsies. So we're going to do and double quotes and then paste that task mode equals 0 in. So click OK and then check one of these to make sure it works. So I'm going to copy paste this. Yep, good. I'm going to come back here. So we're going to do our assignees next. I'm going to drag that up here because that's important. For assignees, we're going to want the task ID for sure, and then the assignee names and their IDs. I'm just going to use the go to columns button in the view tab to go to the task ID because I scrolled through this for like 5 minutes and I couldn't find it. I'm just going to use the go to. So task ID, we want the bookable resource ID name. So that's the assignee name. And then there's one column way over here for the bookable resource. So hold control, select that, make sure that first column stayed selected. Looks like it didn't, so I'm going to reselect that one. Okay, so right click, remove other columns. You'll notice it had a hyperlink in it. So that hyperlink is basically a link to that bookable resource table. So the bookable resource table has information about the assignees as users. In particular, what we want is the user ID. User ID is going to be the ID of the user in the system users table. So that's how you relate the assignee back to all of the metadata about that person. So their business unit, their job title, their department, their email address, if you wanted to use that for anything. All right, task to labels. This is what relates the color flag label things to a given task. So we want this task to label ID, and we only need a couple columns on this. So I'm just going to right click, remove other, and then add the couple of ones that we want. Gear menu, and what we want to do is find the label ID and the task ID, project task ID. Okay, so just those 3 columns. This is going to be used in the relationships. The labels here are the ones that have the color values. So I'm going to do the same thing for this one. So I'm going to select this first column, do a remove other, and then select the columns that I want to keep. So that's the label text, this one, and the color fields. So that's color index name. So what you can see here is that for some of these labels, I've given them a specific name. Because it'll let you do that in Premium Planner. You can double click on the color tag to rename it to something else. But the thing is that if you don't rename it, that field's going to be blank. So if you want to be able to use this and include the colors for the ones that don't have a renamed label, it's a little bit involved, but it is doable. I'm going to show you that in a second. I'm going to go through the process. What I will say is that if you don't need these color labels, just skip this stuff, okay? Because it's very involved. The other thing you might notice is that I went through every single one of these columns and not one of them actually has the proper color name in it. So what I did was I went through and mapped out which color belongs to which color index. But what you can do is if you go and add a table, so I'm just going to go to the home tab and then enter data. I put these all in Excel, and this Excel file is on my blog if you want it. And we can copy and paste this into Power BI and use the color names we have here as a kind of placeholder for where those text labels are blank. And we can also use the hex color codes to color things if we want to, although if you have multiple flags on a given task, coloring those is going to be an interesting exercise. And it's totally okay for this data to be static because it doesn't change at all. It's just which color is associated with which color index item. So I'm just going to click on this column 1 here and then just paste that in. I'll call this flag colors. So this flag colors table, I am going to disable load because we don't need it in our report. It's only going to be used in labels table. So I'm going to right click on it and do turn off enable load. Okay, back to labels. So I'm going to join the flag colors to labels to get them into the same table. I'm going to do this in a way that may be unfamiliar to some people, but what I've found is that if you try to just join directly to labels, when you try and close and apply, it'll give you an error about not being able to directly access the data source. There's all sorts of fixes for this supposedly online about turning off the data privacy settings. None of those worked for me. The only thing that worked was to do the join to a new table instead of the exact same table. So I'm going to call this labels staging. On this one, I'm going to disable load of. So right click, enable load off, and then I'm going to go to the combine button over here and do merge queries and merge queries as new. So again, this works around the not being able to directly access the data source error message, which has been a thing since the dawn of Power BI. So we're going to join labels staging to flag colors on the color index. Click OK. It's going to create a new table. So this is now our new labels table. I'm going to rename it because it got called merge one. I'm going to call it labels. So this one is going to load into the model. Label staging is not, flag colors is not, and we're going to expand this flag colors column. So we're going to get the color name, and you can get the hex codes too if you want to, but it's really the color name that we're after. Now what we can do with this is we can do a custom column that checks to see if there is any label text over here. If there is, it will use that. If there's not, it will use this color name value here. So we're going to go to add column, custom column. I'm going to call it combined label text. You can call it whatever you want. So we're going to do an if statement. So we're going to say if the project label text is equal to null, then use the color name, else use the label text. Click OK. So now you can see it's using the color if there's nothing available, otherwise it's using the actual text. The baseline and the roadmap aspect of this essentially doubles the complexity of the data model, so I'm going to save that for another video because this one is already really long. Next up is project team. For project team, you want that first ID column. We want the project ID, which is this project column. We want their name. This one is a little bit more of a user-friendly role name, so I'll just take that one. And then I'm also going to take this bookable resource column here. Right-click, remove other. Then we're going to expand bookable resource to get the user ID, same thing we did for the assignee. So this one is particularly useful for row-level security. So if you're trying to show only tasks to people that they are a project member or owner of, you want to get this user ID so that you can pull their email address or user principal name or whatever from the user ID table. So that's why we have this users table down here. We can relate users to the project team on the user ID. All right, so the users table, we have the system user ID. This internal email address is the email address of the user. We also have this one over here, which is the domain name. I think this one would be the better one to use for row level security if you are going anywhere with that. Employee ID could be useful if you're populating it. I am not, so it's not useful for me. There's also department, job title, etc. in here if you want that and if it is being populated in your organization. So I just need the user ID for that row level security. So that's what I'm going to take. So the users table has like 10 million columns on it. So we really need to do that, remove other stuff here. Otherwise it's going to really bog down the data model. Okay, so we're going to close and apply now. So home tab, close and apply. All right, so our data is loaded. For the sake of brevity, I've kind of rearranged our tables. I'm in the model view on the left-hand side here, the one that looks like a little diagram. We're going to create relationships between these tables. So this is really important to do in order for us to be able to use this model properly. Dataverse appears to apply the friendly-ish name of the table columns when you load these into Power BI, which is really weird for me. I've never seen it do this to other sources before, but it's basically renamed half our columns. So if you're trying to find something based on the name that you were looking at in Power Query, the name has changed. But on the bright side, you don't probably have to rename quite as much as you normally would. So I guess that's nice. The first thing I'm going to do is do the project relationship because that's an easy one. So I'm going to drag the project field here, which is not what it was called in Power Query, but such is life. I'm going to drag it on top of the MSDYN project field in tasks. So you can see when it's doing this that they are both ID fields, which is good. Click OK. So that one, the filter automatically goes in the right direction. So that's good. For assignees, we want to relate our MSDYN task ID to the project task ID down here. So drag that on. This one is going to be set to single direction by default. We need this to be both if we want to be able to filter our tasks on assignee, which you almost always will want to do that. So set it to both. The task to label is the one that relates our tasks to our labels. So that one we're going to do the project task ID to the project task ID here. Save. And actually that one I think needs to be both directions also. Yeah, so set this one to both and then relate the label ID here to the label ID there. So the checklist, I don't really want the checklist. If you want to use the checklist, just make sure that you've pulled in the task ID and related on the task ID. I'm just going to remove it. The project team, you can relate to the project on this project field. This is going to be the one that you use for row level security if you're using row level security. If you don't need this project team field, don't use it. You'll notice that one is also going single direction in the other way. We need to go the other way. So I'm going to set that to both. And then users, the username is the the login name field, that's going to be what you put the row level security on. We can relate that on this user field. So user to user ID. All right, so that's the model. While we're in this view, we're going to set the data type for our URL fields. So this layout view is currently the only way you can change multiple things at the same time like this. So I'm going to hold control, select both these URL fields. I'm going to go to advanced and set the data category to web URL. This is going to be what makes it clickable as a hyperlink. I'm also going to set the format of the date fields. So I'm going to set the data type on these to date and then set the format to this short date. This would be the point too where if you want to use a date table, which you should use a date tables are very useful. Import a date table. And we also want to set our sort order here. So that was the priority text field. That one under advanced, we can sort it by this priority field. This was the numeric priority. That'll make it sort in the order that we want. And the other one was the status. So status, we wanted to sort that by status sort. All right, I'm going to make a blank table to put our measures in. We're just going to do a few of these to get us started. Underscore measures, load. So for our measures, I'm going to select this table when I add them so that they go into the measures table. It just keeps them organized. So the first measure we want to do is a count of tasks. So count tasks equals, and we can just use count rows tasks here. So something to keep in mind is that the tasks and subtasks, when you're looking at Planner, you can't actually assign parent tasks to anyone. So if I look at a plan, these things won't let you add an assignee. So decide whether or not you want to count them as real tasks. There are ways to filter them out, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So we have a count of tasks. Now we need a count of completed tasks. This is going to let us do a overall percentage complete measure. So count completed tasks. And that's going to be a calculate. So we're using calculate here so that we can add filters. And we're just going to reference our other measure here to count the tasks. That's this one here. And then a comma. And then we add our filter. Status equals complete. You could also use the progress column here. Do the same thing for effort because that's a useful measurement here. Technically, you can use the auto summarizations for some of these things, but it's a lot cleaner if you add real measures for it. So this one is just going to be a sum of the effort field, and make sure to pick the one from the right table. So with one on tasks, that's the total effort. And then we want one for the completed effort at a minimum. There's a field for that. So some effort completed hours. And I'm going to drop these into a table so we can make sure that they're functioning. So that's always a good thing to check, right? So I'm going to drop in the project name, completed tasks, count tasks. We're going to fix the formatting altogether at the end. So for percentage complete, we can use effort or count of tasks. So for effort, that's going to be divide the sum of the completed by the sum of the effort total. And we're calculating this ourselves so that we can use it for anything we want. So we can use it on the buckets, the projects, the tasks, the assignees, any of those things. We're going to make this a percentage in a minute. Right now it's a decimal, and we need our percentage complete by count. That is equal to our count completed. This is why we made measures for these things, so we could reference them and have it be readable. Oops, I forgot to divide. We need to divide that by count tasks. So there's that one. I'm going to delete this column 1 now. You have to wait until you have something else in the table to delete it. Otherwise it deletes the table in a weird way. So one other thing we probably want to do here is count the overdue tasks and then do a percentage for that. So we're going to do very similarly, count to tasks. And similarly, the percentage overdue. So that would be, all right, we need to friendly format these. So back in the model view on the left-hand side, we can go to our measures table and just select all of the measures at once that we want to change the formatting for. So that's all of these ones here. I'm going to set them to whole number. And then I'm going to select the percentage measures and set those to percentage. I want to set the decimal places. So 2 decimal places is really overkill here. So I would go with either 1 decimal place or 0. The other thing people ask about is getting the assignees concatenated into a single cell so that they can put them in a table without causing row duplication. So to do that, you want to go to the table view. I'm going to make this a calculated column. So use calculated columns sparingly, but I feel like this is one of those cases where it's actually useful to have it be a real column. Our assignees are in their own table right now. They're in their own table so that we can use them as filters, so that when you select in a dropdown a specific person's name, it gives you all of the tasks assigned to that person. We want to do calculate concatenate x. So concatenate x is an iterator function. It's going to iterate over assignees and get their name. What do we call the name? Oh gosh, is it bookable resource? I think that's right. And then we want to put a comma and a space and double quotes for the delimiter. So they're going to be comma separated. Order by the resource name here, and then ascending, and close all our parentheses. So that looks right. The calculate here is used to force the relationship context. So you'll notice if I take out the calculate and push apply, it does something really crazy and forces all of those assignee names into the field. So calculate forces that relationship to be used when it calculates for the row context. So now we can do another table that has, so I can put in the task name and the assignee. This is the one with the FX is our calculated column. So if I add that in, you can see the concatenated names here. But I can also use the bookable resource. This needs to be called assignee. So I'm going to rename it here. I'll probably break something. Oh, nope, didn't break anything. That's nice. Okay, so we're going to put the assignee in the filters pane over here. And now you can filter based on the person's name, the content on the page. So this is why we kept it in a separate table and used a relationship. All right, so if we're going to make a few quick visuals just to get you started, again, I'm planning on doing a separate video on a fancier dashboard, but just to make sure everybody knows how to use these things. This new card visual, it's the one with the lightning bolt down here. You can drop your measures in there. So percent overdue tasks, counted tasks, percent complete, whatever you want. You can drop those into cards. These are going to listen to whatever filters you apply to the page, which is kind of cool. And then for visuals, if you wanted to show the level of effort in a more graphical way, you can add your effort amount. Maybe drop your status field in here would be kind of interesting. So I'm going to put the status in the legend and then put the project name. It's just called name. Project. You can drop that in the axis. I'm going to rename this to project name. And then you can sort this. So that gives you kind of a good idea of progress on a given thing. So there are a few options for Gantt charts in Power BI. I have some videos on how to use those. I'm going to link them below. But honestly, Planner Premium already has Gantt charts. So if you want Gantt charts, you may as well just use the web app that they're already in, right? So same thing with the assignees. We use the assignee name from the assignees table, not the one from tasks. And you can use that as a bucket and then count tasks or sum up effort by person that way. You might want to put a filter on here for status. So you could either put it in the legend or you could put it as a filter in here. So you could filter this on only things that are in progress or not started. I don't have any in progress tasks. That looks really lame, but you get the idea. To use those hyperlinks that we created earlier. So for example, our plan names here, you can link those with the conditional formatting. So use the caret next to name and then go to the conditional formatting option and then choose web URL. Select the project URL. That's this one here, and click OK. So now when you click these, they'll go to the plan in Planner. So back to the task hierarchy, I saved this for last because it's a bit of a rabbit hole. If we're trying to differentiate tasks that are things that can be assigned to a person versus those that can't, so those parent tasks you can't assign, you can complete them, but they're more of a grouping or a category than they are a physical task. If you want to be able to differentiate which of those are those parent tasks, we can go to the table view here and then go to the tasks table and use this parent task column to be able to get the path for a given task and essentially count how many children it has. This is something that we can use as a filter in measures or on a page, etc. So I'm going to go to new column in the menu up here. And for path, we're going to get the path of a given task in the hierarchy. So that's going to be the path function. And then we're going to give it the ID of the task. So that's tasks, project task ID. And then we want the parent task ID. So that's this parent task column here. So when we close the parentheses there, now that we have the path, we need to count how many other tasks also have that ID in the hierarchy. So we can add another column for this. I'm making it a column so that we can use it in filters. We can call this counts tasks with task ID. We're going to do a variable here. So var selected ID. So this is just going to be the current row ID. And for that, we want the project task ID. It's just equal to that, nothing else. And then we're going to return calculate count rows in tasks. And we're going to remove the filters on this count by doing all tasks. And then we're going to re-add those filters. So we're going to do path contains. So this is items that contain the selected ID. And then we're going to select our path column. So that's this bottom one here, tasks path. And then we're going to give it the ID. So that's the selected ID variable name. Close our parentheses. So you can see what this is doing here. This particular task, for instance, is a top level task. That's why its path is so short. It doesn't have any other IDs associated with it in its path, but there are other tasks that have this ID in the path. That's why this is returning 3. So this one has 2 child tasks. It's counting itself as a row. So that's why the rest of these that are 1 are going to be tasks that have no children. So what we can do then is make a measure that counts tasks where this is equal to 1. And those are the tasks that are assignable to a person. Count tasks with no children, we can calculate count tasks and put a filter on there for count tasks with the same task ID is equal to 1. Okay, so that was a really long video. If you made it to the end, then congratulations and thank you. And I hope you have a great day.